a second. Let me figure out what the hell is going on my screen. Advanced desktop.
Should I give you my permission first?
I don't think so. No, I have my stuff ongoing.
Good.
And if I expand my screen, forget about it. I'm not going to expand the screen until I have the animation. So let me go like this. Okay, I think everyone sees my screen now, right?
Yes, we do.
Great. So, all right. So this slideshow consists of 4 episodes, and each episode has its own period to talk about its history. And at the end of the day, like on the episode 4, I'm going to talk about each rendering methods in the like super big picture to just give you an idea of like what we are, like doing in the behind the scene if you are going to the website and whatever. All right. So episode 1, down with the web development. So this is the chronological table of this chapter. It starts from the HTML's introduction by Sir Tim Berners-Lee up until 1995, which is when we started having JavaScript. All right. So 1989, HTML was introduced by Sir Tim Berners-Lee. So if you remember this guy's name and the face, then you learned a lot because there are so many developers who don't know about him. Trust me, if you know him, if you can talk about him a little, then it definitely makes you look better as a developer. So just remember his name, okay? So yeah, he was the computer scientist at the organization called Nuclear Research, European Organization for Nuclear Research, which stands for CERN. So what he wanted to do in that particular organization was to make the application to make the document share easier than ever. So he made a proposal of hypertext markup language, which later becomes HTML. And afterwards, in 1989, he created this organization called World Wide Web.
Excuse me.
Sorry?
One person is unmuted, so I guess thank you.
Do I have permission to mute somebody from here? No, never mind. I think it's solved now. All right, so coming back to the slide. So in 1989, he made an organization called World Wide Web, which is 3 Ws. And later in 1994, he added C after W3. So it started called the World Wide Web Consortium. And what it does is to make the specification of the web for HTML and CSS. So whenever we have HTML, we can write like almost exactly the same syntax everywhere using the HTML, right? That is because those organizations makes the specifications for each of them. So we have to thank them. The reason we can eat we can, get the salary and the eat and everything, which is all because this organization and him. So that is him. And let me show you the first website ever made it in the human history, just to give you some idea. All right, so this is the real first web page ever existed. And as you can see in here, so I do the inspect, and if I see the elements, that is hilariously HTML. It doesn't have any CSS or anything. It's just like a pure HTML with the core functionality everywhere. So if you are interested, just send me a message or something so that I can just give you this link and you can mess around with it later. But for now, we are done with it. So that was the beginning of the web development. But it was like super internal project that nobody couldn't really reach them out and make the HTML or anything. So afterwards, 1993, so after a few years, there were a browser made by NCSA called Mosaic. So these browsers started distributed to the regular customers to start visiting web pages. And of course, these browsers had the ability to render HTML and parse it and show its own content and whatever. So there's not much to talk about this browser, honestly, but as long as you can see this picture on the right side at the bottom, this was how it looked. All right, so moving to next. 1994, CSS was introduced. So in 1994, cascading style sheets, which is CSS, was first proposed by Hawking William Lee. And interestingly, he's now a chief technical officer of Opera Software Company, which I'm not sure who's using nowadays, but so yeah, if you really love CSS, then just please like give Opera a shout out later and use. I think like he'd appreciate you. But anyway, so what was revolutionary was of CSS was that like it had the feature called cascade. And this cascading was super revolutionary at the time because by nature of how CSS was introduced, you could kind of overwrite the behavior and the looking of browsers and computers, whatever the like lower level stuff with the CSS, so that you can just, you know, whatever you write in the CSS determines how it looks at the end of the day. So it was revolutionary at the time. And there's an interesting trivia. So there were several versions for CSS, right? Like CSS 1, 2, and 3. But there's no such thing called CSS level 3 and a level 4 actually. Because ever since CSS 3, these W3C organizations stopped making CSS level, which means CSS level 3 is the last level we have. And then after that, every single feature has its own level incremented. So we don't have like CSS as a whole as level. So if you see any job post says, hey, we are looking for a developer who knows CSS4, then you should avoid that company because they don't know what they are talking about. But yeah, interestingly, so CSS stops 3 as of now until, I don't know, unless like some other organization like WattWG or 3WC changes their mind and makes the new version of CSS. All right, so moving to the next. 1995, the turning point of commercial internet. So as you can see, like whole lots of like icons here and there were lots of like popular technologies like born, like explosion of the universe in 1995. And of course, JavaScript wasn't the exception. So JavaScript at the beginning, oh, by the way, like it was created by the Brendan Each. He was working for Netscape. And this JavaScript initially was called Mocha. But then Netscape was kind of like having a bite on Java by contributing like some part of it. They have decided to integrate the name of Java into their own newly made project, Mocha, just to make it sounds better because Java was such a hot new language. People loved it. And Brendan Each and the Netscape thought like, hey, probably we should name Java as well. So why don't we go for JavaScript? And here's the beginning of the confusion, Java and JavaScript. But anyway, so that was the story of JavaScript and Java. And at the same time, 1995, Microsoft jumped into the commercial browser war zone. So there was a war of the browser happening between Microsoft's Internet Explorer and the Netscape. And what was worst about this war was they had different JavaScripts. So Internet Explorer had JScript, which is the kind of like different version of JavaScript, and Netscape was just using JavaScript, okay, basically. And it was so confusing that it was impossible for the developers to have single source of file that runs on both platforms. So people just decided to have some specification on JavaScript as well. Thus, there's an organization called European Computers Manufacturers Association, which is ECMA, or some of you guys call ECMA. And that's where ECMAScript started. So that is the specification of JavaScript that like ECMA or European Computer Manufacturers Association said, hey, okay, you guys can do whatever you want, but please at least make this part united so that JavaScript can run anywhere. So that was the deal of the ECMAScript. And ever since then, 1997, they introduced their own ECMAScript, which is JavaScript specification each year. So that is the reason why we have like EC6 and then like 2015, 2016 and then whatever. And it's like revolutionarily like changing each year, and they're adding so many crazy stuff that makes our lives harder, but that's a different story. All right, so that was the dawn of the web development. So from 1995, there was actually the people started development for a job as a full time to, you know, like get the money out of it, right? So from that on, we are going towards the episode 2, Rise of JavaScript. So up until this point, JavaScript was like everywhere. Not everywhere, but like on the browsers, but it was chaotic. Nobody didn't know like what the hell was going on behind the scenes. So in this, oops, I just added the new style. So in this episode, the chronological order starts from 2004, where WhatWG was founded, up until 2009, where Node.js was released. So I'm just gonna focus on JavaScript in this chapter, basically. So 2004, WhatWG was founded. So this is the organization founded by companies, big companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Mozilla, which is because W3C was doing such a poor job making the specification for HTML and CSS. So they're taking so long time to make the update on them. But you know, technology of course like evolves, and then each of those company had their own browser, and then they wanted to like, you know, move forward, right? So they just decided create their own version of the specification on top of W3C's HTML and CSS specification. And then there was a long period of time that two specifications coexist at the same time. So developers are like having hard time like figuring out like which works on which browser kind of stuff. But then in 2019, finally, W3C announced that WhatWG would be the sole publisher, which means like he's the owner of the specification of the HTML and the CSS. So the war of specification over HTML and CSS was over. And more crazy point about all of those like stories that WhatWG calls their own HTML as live standard, living standard, which means what about HTML5, right? That is originally proposed by W3C. So we are technically calling it wrong if we say HTML5. And thus, there's no such thing HTML6 is coming because W3C is out of the game now. Like, you know, WhatWG is not following their naming standard anymore. So there's no chance that HTML6 is coming. So same joke. If you see the joke post talks about the HTML6, you avoid it, okay? And nobody actually calls HTML living standard because, I don't know, it's weird, you know, like numbers better, right? Because we are developer. So HTML5 kind of indicates the latest specification of HTML. So calling it HTML5 is not technically wrong. But if you want to be extra, like, I don't know, okay, extra correct, then you should call it HTML LS or living standard. But that's another story. All right. And around 2005, Ajax was born. So this is where JavaScript started having so much power over browser. So Microsoft introduced new HTML tag, I guess. It was HTML tag called iframe, and it had the feature to make the asynchronous JavaScript logic to run behind the scene. So what it means that up until Ajax, this is the term represents the technology that enables JavaScript to run behind the scene without blocking anything, like promise or async or whatever. Up until this point, browser needed to reload or go to the next page to fetch the latest data. But with Ajax, you can get the latest data without going to any other screen. That is revolution, because that's a revolution, too many revolutions. But so what's crazy about this one was like Google was fan of this idea, so they just decided to create the Gmail and the Google Map, implementing like in this way. So at the time, if you go to like some map site, that you put the address, then the browser needed to reload or go to the other page to show you that exact map for you. But Google made the Google Map with Ajax, so that you type the address, then the browser updates itself and then you see the information without going to any other screen. So that was the almost first introduction of SPA, stands for single page application. That is such a buzzword that people are using. So just remember one thing. If people say SPA, single page application, always think of Google Map, because that's what it is. Like without going to any other screen, you can do so many stuff, right? All right, so that was the Ajax. And that's where HTML and the CSS and the JavaScript bundled like stronger than ever, because you can do so many stuff with the web application now without making the, always specific application or whatsoever. All right, and then later, 2006, jQuery was released. So this is one of the biggest deal in the JavaScript world, because at the time, JavaScript sucked. What I mean by that is like people thought like JavaScript is just a script to make the animation cute, just making like the cursor bigger, or like if you move the mouse cursor, then there's a like star shining and then making some noises and whatever. So still, like there was an e-commerce script. It was really hard for you to create the application that runs everywhere, because every single browser had their own API to manipulate DOM and like Ajax and whatever. So it was hard for you to write the unified version of JavaScript. But then jQuery changed everything. So think about TypeScript. Whatever you can do in JavaScript, TypeScript can do, right? It's a superset. It wraps JavaScript. jQuery was kind of like that. What it does is jQuery wraps the JavaScript and gives you some API. As long as you use jQuery's API, it runs the browser-specific APIs underneath, so that you have one jQuery file which contains probably like 1,000 lines. At least you can run each browser's environment. And that was revolutionary, because like that was web front-end developers' dream, like have one single source of truth and then run everywhere. And jQuery made it possible, and SPA, single page applications, exploded from this point, because it was easier than ever to write the Ajax because of the jQuery syntax. All right, so moving to the next. And this is the paradigm shift of JavaScript. 2009, Node.js was released. So Node.js is a JavaScript runtime environment that runs on the server or anywhere, backed up by Google's V8 engine, which is the engine runs with Google Chrome. So, sorry, I forgot to get his name, but he extracted V8 engine and decided to like put this engine in the runtime environment of server, so that JavaScript could run literally anywhere. And that was the start of the paradigm shift of JavaScript, that JavaScript runs everywhere. Because up until this point, JavaScript was only limited to the browser front-end side, and you can do like some manipulation stuff with the easy script. But from this V8 engine and Node.js, you literally could run JavaScript on the server side. So you could write one service instead of one browser's looking, one service from top to bottom with JavaScript. How crazy is that? And if I go a little bit deeper, Node.js has event loop and a low level and INO API and everything, and it has low level APIs grabbed by C++. So pretty much Node.js runs with C++. It's just a script that can manipulate C++ kind of stuff. And shortly after 2010 NPM, Node Package Manager was released. And as it's written at the bottom, like there are 1.3 million packages registered under the NPM right now. This is one of the most popular package manager on the earth. All right, so that was the rise of JavaScript. Does anyone have any questions up until this point? Oh, there you go. Yeah, I saw somebody raised your hand.
Yes, I have a question about jQuery. So who made jQuery? So who maintained and who made jQuery library?
That's a good question because I have to Google it. I didn't really go dive deep into jQuery, but yeah, I can give you some quick tip to how to check the history of web development is that going to jQuery, going to the Wikipedia is the easiest way for you to figure out what the history was, because every single time if you go to some technologies wiki page, there's a history. So by reading here, you can have the idea of what the jQuery was. And yeah, according to this wiki page, it says it's made by NYC John Rizik. And he was influenced by some other developers' CSS query library. So it was actually imported from CSS library into JavaScript to have the idea or do pretty much the similar stuff in the JavaScript world. So that's how jQuery began. And of course, that was a super huge deal at the time. Not anymore though.
Yeah, I got this. Thank you so much.
No problem. Does anyone have any other questions?
I've got one more question.
Sure, go ahead.
What I'm curious about is that maybe your browser extension, I could see that something JavaScript something at the top of the search result in Google.
Here?
Can you search something? Anything? Yes.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean, Google.
Oh yeah.
Let's see Opera. Then.
Oh yes, that's it. What is that?
I can give you the detail later.
Okay, sure. Well, I was just curious. Sorry for interrupting. Yeah, thanks.
That's good that you're curious. It is super, it is super cool because if you forgot the commands to do the git some command, let's say undo commit. Oops. Git undo commit. Then what happens is it's gonna give you some idea.
Wow, that's
pretty cool,
sounds
right?
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna give everyone the detail later, but okay.
Oh, yeah, sure. Thanks.
I see somebody else raising your hand. So, could you unmute yourself and talk a little for the question?
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Guy. Kei-san, thank you so much for doing this awesome webinar workshop.
No problem.
I have a quick question. So I'm a complete beginner, so sorry, this is a given, and then I put the question onto the chat box too. So Ajax sounds amazing to me, and yeah, but I see not all websites use Ajax, but still they use the kind of conventional way to reload the pages and then show a new pages, right?
Yep.
So why don't they jump into Ajax? So is there any kind of disadvantage of it? Is there a reason why? Yeah.
That's a good question. And the answer could be super vague because it depends on the platform or the service you're providing. Let's say if you go to Google Map, then, okay. So if you want to check this TNT supermarket, then you get this information and you don't want to go to the next page to fetch the data, right? But let's say in the this beautiful free image splash, So we want to go to the other screen to show the okay, this is not doing it. Just give me a second. I have to figure out what the service is. Like, okay, let's go to the dev community. Okay, so if I click on this one, then it goes to the next page dedicated for this blog post, right? Which is because of the UI pattern. Like, we don't want to do everything in a single page. Depends on the content. It's better for you to like link the user to the other page to show the contents. So that's the reason why you see like some different approaches on different platforms. If that answers your question.
So it's like pop-up plugin is kind of similar to Ajax. Is it using Ajax technique, like pop-up plugin,
like alert?
No, it's like if you click the picture and then boom, you can see the picture like bigger. If there is a website that has that feature, is that Ajax?
Gotcha. So this is not Ajax. This is just a JavaScript manipulation of render. So there's no asynchronous call to ask our server for the latest information or anything. It's just JavaScript to grab some data and then render the pop-up or dialog on the top of whatever rendered in the top. Okay.
Thank you so much.
No problem at all. Does anyone else have questions? Otherwise,
in addition to that question, answering like one of the disadvantages of SBA, single. SBA? The single sign. Sorry, I forgot the acronym. What was the name?
Single page application.
Single page application is one of the disadvantages. You have to load the all JavaScript at once when you first load the page, like when you first pitch the website. So that costs a lot sometimes. So that's one of the disadvantages. So sometimes they let the server side to do that, or
that's a little good point, Yama. I'm gonna get to the point, so just be patient a little bit, okay?
Okay, got it.
I'm gonna talk about it super.
All right, got it. Yeah, sorry about it. Yeah,
no worries.
And I also have a question about the HTML5. Maybe it's in the 10th slide 10 page. Page 10. Right. Yeah, I was not familiar with front end, so I was surprised. Like there were two standard, and this means like, but I mean, until 2019 there were two standard, and everyone, like some people were using like a standard, one standard, and the other was using like the other standard, right? But until like
on the browser, actually, like Safari had its own standard, and like some other like Internet Explorer had like different standard and everything, so it was kind of chaotic at the time.
Oh, I see. So that means like one browser like use like one specific standard. Like it doesn't depend on the website. Like the browser decides that.
Pretty much, yeah. It's pretty much not the case anymore, because what WG is like taking care of like this kind of stuff right for now, so things are much easier than ever. But still, like if you are using like older version of browser or anything, there were certain stuff you cannot use with the latest HTML feature or anything. So it's always a good idea for you to look up your specific browser you are targeting and look up the if it's capable of doing your stuff or not.
I see. Yeah, because the only like standard I heard was HTML5. So I thought like there is only HTML5, but like until 2019, everyone was saying HTML5. But that means like that concludes like two standards, and everyone was just using the same word, and maybe some people that didn't know what they're using. Just they thought it was HTML5, but it wasn't like something that happened, right?
Yeah, this is not the fault of developers. It's just a fault of like how those organizations are fighting each other. So, but yeah, things are getting better now. So don't worry about it.
Yeah, very great. Yeah, it was. So this was so interesting topic. So yeah, that's all for me.
Great. All right, so then I'll move to episode 3, as I don't see any other questions from anyone. So chronological table of this chapter again. So starts from React. I'm gonna just focus on React, by the way, because if once I dive into the rabbit hole of like how many frameworks there are kind of stuff, it never ends. So just for the sake of simplicity, I'm just gonna focus on React. And I just gonna go for up until the point that Gatsby was released. Okay. So 2013, React was open sourced. Everybody's favorite. Everybody knows this name. Everybody's using it. And I guess there were smaller amount of people who knows that it was actually called Fox.js at the beginning. But they renamed to React when they're open sourcing, and I think that was the best decision they've ever made. Because if that was called Fox.js, then I think React wasn't this popular. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, so React is here, and this is such a deal changer because it kind of made DOM manipulation much easier. Like it doesn't even make you to use get element by ID kind of stuff all the time. Using Babel compiler, you just write the JXX file, the React takes care of this re-rendering and how to render and everything, right? So this is deal breaker. And from this React library, so many other frameworks like Vue and Angular adapted this pattern of component-based development. This is basically about hey, let's think about UI components based and build it from there and reuse everywhere like design does, right? So and after a few years, Facebook at the same team made React Native. And this kind of helped the paradigm shift of JavaScript runs everywhere kind of stuff, because now from 2015, if you know JavaScript, then you can even make the native application using it. So cool. So that was React. And this is by far the most popular JavaScript library, or I can even put it as a framework, not that much of framework, but it is as big as you can kind of think of framework. All right, so moving on to next. Redux was introduced. So React had one philosophy for the data flow, which is it has to be unidirectional instead of going triangle or bidirectional. It wanted to make the data flow just single direction, going left to right or top to bottom. And this philosophy or way of thinking as data flow was called Flex architecture. And it was kind of alternative architecture of MVC, model, view, and controller. So it kind of things simplified a little. But so Redux wanted to go extreme with this idea of Flex. So they made the library that takes care of the state, which is global state that any UI can access to the store as a state, so that you can just have the single source of truth for your application. That was also revolutionary because in React by nature, just to pass the data to the child components, you needed to use the props. So you have to pass one particular data into ancestors, your grandchildren's grandchildren. Then you have to have same name everywhere to drilling down the data to the point you want to use. So people didn't like it, though React team actually kind of suggested, because it makes things explicit, which means you can see what's happening in the code, but people didn't want to adapt it. So there was state management library like Redux. And of course Redux was popular, so people were well adapted this one. So other frameworks like Angular and Vue made their own version. Angular was Nginx, Vue.js was Vuex. But I'm not sure if they are still a thing yet, because ever since Redux was introduced, there were so many other options for the state management as well. So Anyway, so I think if you use Create React app or regular React application, that's where you stop. Which means like beyond this point, you are not really adapting yet. Because after this point, here's a big stuff introduced, which is Next.js. There we go. So I guess like some people wanted to hear about this particular framework. So Next.js was introduced by Vercel, which is the company that like takes care of like so many open source projects. Anyway, so this was made on top of React. And this is the framework that gives you the ability to do the server-side rendering, which is SSR, or SSG, which stands for static site generation. So it was considered to be one of the modern web development's paradigm shift again, because it actually changed the way how web developers think to render some stuff. So up until this point, what we were doing is just push everything with JavaScript and then let JavaScript to do their stuff. So if the client had slower internet or older phone or computer, it was super slow, and it was like really client heavy structure that like it depended on their own environment so much. But with Next.js, we have less dependency on client's environment. So because I'm gonna get to the detail later, but SSR and SSG by nature does so many stuff in the server side already that client doesn't have to do much if you compare to the regular React or jQuery application, because what they do is receive the HTML and they map the HTML with JavaScript. So this heavy manipulation was super expensive that they wanted to avoid. Thus, Next.js was introduced and it was a thing. And there's another thing Next.js introduced super well was file-based routing. What I mean by that is like up until this point, you needed to make like one big component using some other third-party library called like, I don't know, for example, React Router. You need to actually write the logic and the properties and data and everything to like make the application be able to go to some other page and having multiple pages of them. But Next.js introduced the file-based routing that as long as you have file which has this certain name convention and structure, you didn't have to write a single code to make the new page within your web application. So that was super simple and people loved it. But of course, there were several drawbacks that like it is gonna be a bit hard for you to like make a super customized navigation, specific logic and whatever, but that's too much detail, I guess. So 2016, that's where modern front-end development began. And 2017, Gatsby was born. So it's an open source project made by Gatsby. Gatsby made Gatsby. And it's on top of React again. And it fully invested on SSG, which again stands for static site generation. And what it did super well was that because of the nature of static site generation, it actually got rid of the need of server up and running, serving the data all the time. Thus, people came up with the data structure or stack structure called Jamstack, which is the idea of like getting rid of the server up and running all the time to serve data and depend on like multiple distributed services. For example, if you want to do the authentication, then let's use OAuth service, and using the library, you don't have to use the server to authenticate such stuff. And yeah, that was Gatsby. And what's funny now is that server-side rendering is becoming too popular that Gatsby actually decided to adopt SSR. So Gatsby is not pretty much SSG specific framework anymore. But I think that's a necessity for them to survive like this crazy framework war in 2022. So yeah, interesting story. Anyway, so that wraps up the entire rough, super big picture history of web front-end development. So at this point, I don't have so much thing to add in regards to the history. So I'm just gonna explain each rendering method a little, just to give you a better idea of like what Next and Gatsby and so many other like modern frameworks are doing well. Okay. And from this point, I have to run the animation, so I'm gonna just go to the entire screen mode. Okay, so let me get rid of this everyone's face so that I can show this one better. Awesome. So let's start from client-side rendering. Client-side rendering is something you do.
Sorry, excuse me.
Okay.
Before going there, may I ask? I'd like to ask one question.
Sure. Go ahead.
Can I think that as long as we use React, I mean React means client-side rendering? Is my recording understanding is correct? Like I thought like React is a kind of client-side rendering base, and then Next.js is also add server-side rendering and static-side generation. But is it right or is it
Pretty much right? Yes. I mean, you can. Yeah, I'm gonna get to the point to explain like what's the actual difference between Next.js and regular React. So I think I can answer your question with that. So stay tuned.
Got it?
All right, so CSR, client-side rendering. That's what you do if you write the application with regular React or jQuery or Vue or Angular or whatever the regular stuff it is. So imagine we are in the website and on the page that shows user data, user information like username and I don't know, ID and whatever. So if you hit the URL of the page, what happens in the browser, which represents this client on the right side, is of course makes a request, right? And after server receives the request from the browser generates the markup and return it to the client. And that's where JavaScript does its own logic to map the given HTML and create a whole proper looking in the client side. So JavaScript is actually taking care of the rendering part in the regular React app. And then after making the skeleton page, so let's imagine at this point, we have everything to be rendered, but it doesn't have a content. So let's call it skeleton page, okay? So in order to grab the latest data without going to the other page, we are gonna do the Ajax stuff, right? And what it means by that is this page is going to generate a request to the server. Hey, I'm at this web page, so I want to get the user data. So server receives the request and then makes the request to the database to fetch the contents that markup or client wants to have. And server receives the data from the database, and server does its own logic to like change the shape or whatever kind of stuff, business logic. And finally returns the content to the client side. So that's the whole flow of client side rendering. Does anyone have questions up until this point? Very good. Okay, then I am gonna talk about the static side generation. So imagine this is a website that contains blog posts. And before user visits to the website, like let's say like before, like a few days before, we have content manager pushing the contents to the server or the service that hosts server side static side generation. Then we push the contents to this server to be requested by the client. We have everything ready in the server already. And after a few days or a few hours or whatever the random time, client goes to the website and makes a request. Hey, I want this page. And of course, server receives the request and returns it. And that's it. Like, you know, that's super simple, right? Content manager just pushes its content and the server just returns whatever pre-made stuff to the client. So client, what it does what it needs to do is just simply make the single request and you are good to go because you receive the package that contains everything already. So that is static site generation, which was fully invested by Gatsby, if you guys remember. And last but not least, server-side rendering. So this is where the real deal happening. So let's imagine as the same example I did in the client-side rendering, we are going to the web page that renders the user's information. So client makes the request, hey, I want to have this page. And server, before bring markup back to the client, it makes the request to the database to get the user data first. And server receives the request and fill up the contents to the markup. So at this point, you have everything to be rendered in the server side. So the server at the end pushes its content with markup, so client can render whatever the stuff is received. So this is server-side rendering. What is super good about server-side rendering is that like you do much less stuff if you compare to the client-side rendering. So you are not really depending on the client's environment. You do as much as you can in your, I don't know, like fastest environment you can think of. Probably it's in San Francisco, and push the content to the client, and all client needs to do is just receive the data, and that's it. So that is server-side rendering. So this concludes all three methods of rendering in the client side. So does anyone have any questions about those three? If not,
I have one question. So I think it's a kind of general question. So I'm still not very familiar with the Next.js. What I'm curious about is do you come up with any shortcomings of Next.js compared to React?
okay, I'll get to the point. So
That's right. Thanks.
No worries. So this concludes the entire, I don't know, talk. So let me dive right into the real code using Next.js to show what's the real difference between React and Next.js in the real world examples. And I think that's gonna answer your question, Hiroshi.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
No problem. Okay, so let's imagine we are at the website that needs the JavaScript, let's say. So what I can do is I can disable the JavaScript so that you are going to see what I meant by client-side rendering. So I assume Google Map is client-side rendering web page. So if I reload this page, what's going to happen is it actually gets pissed or mad because there's no JavaScript running. So you can't do anything because there's no Ajax or anything happening, right? So this Google Map cannot write the graph of map using JavaScript. So Google developers are clever enough to put this message, says, hey, you need a JavaScript. What the hell? Like, are you in the 1990 or something kind of stuff? So that is the deal of the regular application that depends on the JavaScript. However, if you are using TypeScript though, not TypeScript, I'm sorry, Next.js, there's a website using Next.js behind the scene. So if I go here, what's gonna happen is, let me disable the JavaScript first. All right, so if I go to this ping GG, what's gonna happen is I still see the contents, which is because everything is made in server already. And as you noticed, it was freaking fast, which was because Next takes care of the HTML parsing part, which means if you build the application with Next.js, by nature on the server, you have everything rendered already. So unless you are doing like Ajax or data fetching in the client side, you can have the closest skeleton page possible just by using Next.js. And of course, there are some stuff like gets broken because I disabled JavaScript, but let me bring it back to the regular JavaScript stage so that you are going to see like what's the actual result. There you go. So these are the JavaScript part of this page, obviously, and this is amazing because we are doing less in the client side. Means even the clients are in the slower internet or like older computer or device, we can show things more faster than ever. So like less, do it faster. That's the principle of the Vercel. All right. So what about the data fetching part? So let me demonstrate the difference between regular React and the server-side running applications data fetching part, okay? So this is regular React app, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna straight up copy this link, okay? So save link address and go to this page, and I am going to make this web page's internet super slow deliberately. So this is slow 3G, okay? Slow 3G, okay? So if I put this page, then what I'm gonna do in this page is I fetch 5,000 objects. So if I go into this page, then it started loading, and it shows up the web page over here, right? It's still loading, and you finally get the 5,000 objects, which is because you made a request to get the markup, and you got the markup. And afterwards, you are making Ajax logic running behind, so you fetch the 5,000 objects data. And meanwhile, you are waiting for it, we saw this loading text showing up. Let me show you once more so that we have a better idea. So this loading is the one I'm talking about. So that's how regular React.js work. What about the Next.js, which does the server-side rendering? So copy link address and inspect. And I'll do the same for the sake of the fairness. So I have slow 3G. I go to the web page and it's loading the page. And see, it doesn't even have the loading state, which is because I did everything in the server already. So the client doesn't even need to do the waiting part of the logic. How crazy is that? So this is the deal with the Next.js. But you might think, hey, but this is not fair because you were doing like server-side logic, which means like you were doing in the server. What if you do the same in the Next.js with the React.js? So I actually prepared for that case before you guys start asking me about this question. So just give me a second. So this is the next application, okay? And then I'll open the other one, which is for the presentation React. Okay. And I do this code and I delete everything. Sorry, my computer is kind of slow now. Oops, I deleted too much code. So what you see on the left side is Next application, and what you see on the right side is the regular React. But just to make it like more easier to see, I'm gonna just bring this app into this right side. Okay, and I think you should be able to see everything in here. So let's go. So forget about all of those like file structure. It's a bit different if you compare to the regular React. But if I go to this app, then I have everything basically. So I blink this up to the right side. All right. Sorry, that was actually index. So it goes to the left side. So, all right. So this is the comparison left to right of React and Next.js. I'm going to just make the page a bit bigger for you guys. So I think you guys can see a bit better. All right. So this fetch followers, skipping all the detail, it just makes the request to the server to get the 5,000 objects. Okay. And in the regular React app, I guess some of you might have been exposed to the React already, so you know what's happening in here. But this is a regular React app that makes the request upon mounting. So when the application gets rendered, then this use effect runs. And invokes the function called fetch followers, which makes the request to the 5,000 objects, and you set this response as a state, and you map them to the application. And meanwhile, you are waiting for this one to be filled, we are just showing this loading. And that is the reason why we saw the loading in the regular React app. However, in the regular Next.js, we have this one particular extra function. Other than that, it's almost exactly the same. What we do is using this static name get server side props, we do this logic in the server side before we send the response to the client browser. And that is the reason why we receive the data first and bring back to the client's browser. So just for the sake of the similarity, I made these photos checking logic as well, but we actually don't do this in the client side, because by the time you receive the data, you have this one already. And you know what's great about this Next.js example is we don't have this like use effect and then use state bullshit. Like you don't have to, depend on the React specific API, which has like too much context to consume. Just make the function getting called in the server side and then you are good to go. This is the good thing about Next.js. But I'll go a bit further than that, okay? What if I do the same as React in Next.js? So obviously, I need to get like all of these functions imported, but I'll delete these properties and forget about those like Next.js specific stuff. So all right, now, so left and right, we have almost the same code and same code on the client side, okay? So I am going to run this application npm run div. And I'll run this application on the client side. See, we had exactly the same logic in the Next.js, but one step further. What if I disable the JavaScript with the exact same code in the Next.js? What's gonna happen here as the answer is, you still see the contents. Like JavaScript doesn't give you a warning says, hey, you need a JavaScript to run the application. Which is because when you build the application using Next build before you deploy to the server, Next.js is clever enough to make the HTML contents build already so that you don't have to depend on this building part in the client side anymore. And this concludes my tech talk today. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Kei. It was amazing and interesting, and I'm sure that this presentation motivates all the developers joining this event.
Oh, thank you very much for the kind feedback. I appreciate that. Yeah, like it is so hard to know the real difference between Next.js and then React. But what I wanted to the idea I wanted to give everyone is that like Next is not something intimidating. You don't have to be afraid of using it, because you can write exactly the same code in the Next.js, and by nature, you have better performance already. So awesome. Does anyone have any questions before I wrap up this, stuff? Tech talk? Presentation? I don't know how to call this event, honestly. Like,
I have one question. This is not about React and Next.js. That I have asked the same question to a couple of people, so that I would like your opinion on this. This is about the Redux, and I think that the Redux used to be a very popular topic among all the developers, but because of the what is that?
State management libraries?
I use context API and the reducer hook. So I feel that the Redux is becoming less and less popular. So do you think, what is your opinion on how valuable it is to learn about Redux from now?
So I wouldn't say it's mandatory anymore. Like back in like 3 or 4 years ago, I think knowing Redux is quite important. But at this point, honestly, I don't think it's something like you definitely should know anything. If you know it, then that's definitely an asset because there are still like quite a few companies using them still, but it's not the latest trend for sure. Because as you saw, like this Next.js, they don't really have to use state management or anything. Like there were some alternatives like Jotai, use query, use React query, and TRCP and some other stuff. Like they do stuff much simpler than the Redux. So this concept of Flux I introduced in the slideshow earlier was not the super duper trendy anymore. And as you said earlier, like by using React's regular APIs, you can do the Flux pattern too. So you don't really have to depend on the Redux for 100%. However, though, Redux is getting super better. It has like much less blueprint and everything. So DX, developer experience of Redux, is improving every single year as well. So I wouldn't particularly hate Redux or like think Redux as a super old, jQuery like abandoned library. Redux still is something worth to, practice or know if you have some spare time.
Oh, thank you for clarification. Yeah, I didn't know that Redux is still improving. So yeah, I think I have to continue on learning a bit about Redux. Thank you.
Yeah, quite drastically. You'd surprise. All right. So does anyone have questions? Are you raising your hand in your video or in the Zoom?
Anyway, thank you, Kei. It was really informative topic. So my question is just about Next.js. So is it possible to use both server-side rendering and server-side generation at the same time? No, just at the same, not just at the same time. Just can we use both?
In the Next.js project, it is possible by using SSG. There are some APIs from Next.js that enables some certain page to be SSG. So by using it, like you can just do the SSG stuff in the Next.js side. All you have to do is just publish the page. It's the same stuff. It's quite easy if you can do it in the Next.js. Like if you go to the documentation, then you should be able to see like how we do it.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, I also have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you for a good presentation. And actually, I have more general question. So
Sure.
Yeah, for example, jQuery is library, and React.js is library, and Next.js is a framework, and Vue.js is framework. So to be honest, I'm very confused with the definition of the specific terms. So what is the front-end library and the front-end framework? Do you have
That's a good question. So the reason React says its library is that like function is the first class citizenship in the JavaScript world. So what they are doing is just giving a JavaScript feature with the API. They are not doing like super fancy building stuff or anything because obviously you need like Babel and Webpack to do like all of those compiling and building stuff, right? But Next.js, however, it has its own stuff and like, file-based routing and everything embedded in that particular package. So they started calling themselves as a framework, which is made on top of React. So I think Vue.js and Angular, I don't have too much like clarification on them, but I think they have their own way to like build and compile stuff. And I think their file extension is not the first class citizen in the JavaScript world as well. So they just went beyond the boundary of the regular JavaScript is capable of, thus it was framework. But it is really hard to think all of this stuff because there are lots of context unexplained. So just go to the website and see if that's a library or framework. That's much easier.
Okay, thank you so much. I got your point. I'm gonna search it.
Yep. Any other questions?
As far as I see, like mostly Next.js is pretty much superior to React. And is there any like a reason not to use React anymore? Or like whenever we start to use some or create or build an application, should we always use Next.js, or is there any reason to use React specifically?
I'd personally say just use Next.js makes more sense nowadays. But of course, there are drawbacks because like if you use Next.js, then you have like limited option for the deployment service, if I were correct. Like I haven't done much stuff like in Next.js at this point, but I believe like if you make like a big Next.js application, let's say, and you deploy it to the Vercel, then it's kind of costly if you compare to the regular React app.
So if you use, So if you use Next.js, the only way or the only place to deploy is Vercel. There is no option else.
No, there are still like some places like you can deploy to, but I think Vercel has the best integration experience to the Next.js deployment. I mean, which is obviously it's from the same company, but yeah, it's super easy. Trust me, like you just hit like some CLI command and you are good to go.
I see. Got it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
But for your personal project though, definitely go for Next.js, I would say, because your website is small enough that you don't have to pay Vercel for the deployment. And yeah, so many like stuffs, like improvements and performance comes for free just to use Next.js. So I definitely recommend you to start using Next.js over create React app.
Gotcha.
Is there any other questions from anyone else? Awesome. So sorry.
Yeah, this could be a bomb question, but what do you think about the remix? Like I don't know anything about remix, so if you can, yeah, could you simply like super simply explain what is remix?
Don't get me started because I love remix. I can do whole tech talk about remix as well, but yeah, just to oversimplify it, we saw Gatsby earlier, right?
Yeah.
And it was fully invested on SSG at least until this year. Remix is kind of other side of SSR. It fully invested on server-side rendering, and Remix is pretty much the direct competitor of Next.js because there are so many like similar features and everything. So if you don't really bother to use SSG, then I honestly say there wouldn't be too much difference between them. But Next.js has bigger community for sure. But Remix recently got acquired by Shopify, so it's expected to get bigger and bigger as well. So as of now, like 2020 December 3rd, there are no much difference. Of course, there are like some difference in the APIs, but what the outcome of writing code is pretty much the same.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yep. Thanks for answering.
But there are 100 parts that I love Remix over Next.js, but I'm not gonna go dive into it because that's obviously a rabbit hole I can never end. So
yeah, sounds like we have a next topic.
Yep. That's a good idea. So does anyone have questions? Okay, I think I'm officially concluding this entire more than an hour tech talk. First, I'm so sorry to like run over more than an hour. I expected myself to finish like less than an hour, but like things happen, so I'm sorry about that. And the second, thank you very much every single one on this talk to spend your valuable time with me to go over this crazy chaotic history of front-end development. And if you get like some little, like even tinier piece of impression that web development front-end is fun, then that's a huge win to me. So thank you very much everyone, and I really hope to like see every single of you soon in like some other places or whatever. So appreciate it. Thank you.